All right, joining us now here on the Black and Gold Banneret. He's former guard at UCF, and of course, has been the radio analyst. How long now have you been the radio analyst with Mark Daniels there?
I think this is like my 11th year, man, 11th
Woo!
season. Yeah, since 2011 I got out, and then so it would have been that first 2011. So yeah, I'm old guy, man, over a decade for sure.
We gotta celebrate. We gotta get like a plaque for you or something. Like we get an
Yeah,
anniversary, a decade. That's pretty good. Speak of Taylor Young joining us here, who has been an awesome job in the radio with Mark, and I've been privileged to fill in for Mark and work with you. Which so thank you for taking care of me when I was filling in for Mark there, and putting into words what was going on the court as I set you up. But it's been a fun year.
it has been, man. You've been crushing it too, the times you did fill in. But man, I think this team's got something. I think they've put together a great string, a great resume at this point in the season. And I know we'll get to that, but a lot of talent, a lot of depth, faced a little adversity and some injuries and some people being out to start the season and to start the conference season. So yeah, this season's kind of got it all so far.
Well, let's talk about the last game, which is going to go down in history as one of the great games in the history of the program. One of
Yeah.
the wildest games, definitely in the history of the program. The double overtime win over Memphis at home. You've had a couple days to kind of digest this, and you have a unique perspective because people may not know this, but you've been part of two of the longest games in the history of the program. You've been part of two triple overtime games.
Yeah.
You were at the game that I was one of the best games I ever saw was that Tulsa triple overtime game in '08 where you played 1 minute behind Michael Dono just hogged up all the minutes
Oh yeah.
and Chip Cartwright among others, but that went triple overtime at home. I remember that building was crazy. It was like there. And then you were played the triple overtime game a few years later at Marshall, which that thing had its own drama. Maybe that's just about as loony of a game as it got. And you alluded to it on the radio broadcast, even on Wednesday in that game. So you have a unique perspective. You can relate to what you saw from what the players went through on the court. You've had a
Yeah.
couple days to digest it. What comes to your mind now, having reflecting on that game now as an analyst, who's somebody who's been in those type of crazy games?
It was incredible. Still on a little bit of a high. Never called a game. The only game that I called on the radio like that with Mark was the NCAA tournament game where you're just but we won this one, right? So it wasn't as heartbreaking. And of course, I'm referencing that Duke game up in Columbia, South Carolina a few years back. But so the energy in the atmosphere in the building was bonkers. It was insane. As a player, I think you referenced those two triple overtime games that I've personally been a part of at UCF. One playing 1 minute, and then the other, I think I played 44 minutes. The one at Marshall. So as a player, it's a lot, right? You strength and conditioning coaches should get a shout out for how those guys, because at the end of the game, man, you're just so tired, you're so worn out, but you're also just so competitive and you're grinding it out. And so just I guarantee that a lot of the guys were in the ice bath and doing treatment, after the game and the next day and kind of looking to recover for this Tulane game on Saturday because it certainly takes a lot out of you. But I think one thing that we talked about on the radio broadcast that I'm reminded of, and we talked about this just in the first overtime, but and anytime it goes into overtime or extra innings, if you will, you have foul out situations. You have you have Jalen Young that fouls out. You're already down, Darius Johnson. And then the big one, right? You have Taylor Hendricks foul out, and you're just like, how? And then it goes into a second overtime. And so part of you is like, wow, like how do you win this game without your key guys in this? And Memphis faced it too. I think it was DeAndre Williams who found out and wasn't part of a lot of the second overtime. So you start having these guys that are coming in and contributing that are in roles that maybe they haven't been all season. And you saw PJ Edwards contribute and score 8. I think he had 8 points in both overtimes, hitting two huge threes and one of the biggest 2-point shots of the game over Kendrick Davis. So specifically to my experience as a player, I remember the triple overtime at Marshall. We lost the game on a box out because the player that was in the game wasn't one that you typically would have in there. It was a player named RJ Scott, and he's blocking out a 7-footer, and so it's quirky because all of a sudden you just have these different lineups and guys contributing, and it's just you're trying to will yourself to win the game. And so Mark and I kind of took a deep breath after the broadcast. It was the most intense call I think we've had, but specifically at home. And we were just like, wow, doesn't it feel good to win that type of game? Because so often you're on the other side of it and it really doesn't feel good. But I will say, I've played in a lot of games in that atmosphere, and we've had some big time atmospheres. I remember back in the day when, I was freshman, sophomore, junior year, those Memphis teams, anytime they'd come to town, you're basically selling out the arena. And I felt that. I felt that in that Memphis game, is that game means something. For whatever reason, that brand and that Memphis name on the front of the jersey, Orlando's very aware and wants to get that win. It means something. And I get chills talking about how electric that atmosphere was. As a radio broadcaster, I could barely hear Mark in the overtimes. It was so loud. I remember holding my hands over my earphones just to try to hear what he was saying. So it was special, man. Very special.
It really was. You're right. The atmosphere was electric. I wrote about that as my recap about how fans made a difference. And I've said this because we've talked about it on the air in the past on the broadcast, and when you've been on with us. When fans bring that energy and that passion, players feed off of that. And I thought that helped us pull out because we were shorthanded, as you mentioned. I mean, with Darius already out, Michael Durr out, you lose the foul trouble. But I thought the fans didn't, really gave the players a boost, and you can even see it how the players celebrated with the fans and the students in particular. I thought was incredible. But that was just part of the story. You're right. Memphis has always been that game. They've been the brand really since Conference USA. These games have been going on since Conference USA when we used to play in the old venue, and John Calipari would have Joey Dorsey, who was there among 100
who looks the
assists.
same.
Yeah, he could probably. I was worried he was going to suit up and play a few more minutes there. But you're right. That added to that game, which was such an emotional game. You mentioned the Marshall game. Was that the game where the Marshall coach faked a heart attack, or Pat? Or is that a different Marshall game? Because I always get them. I don't know if it was the same.
No. That was a different. I'm pretty sure that was a different head coach. Yeah.
Okay,
That was
right.
actually the Marshall game I'm referencing. Donnie Jones was still the coach of
right,
Marshall, and that was the last year. And then he came to UCF that next year. So there was some drama there for sure.
Storylines, because I was trying to think of what crazier games have UCF been a part of, and that the one with Marshall. You're right. Again, I'm always confused. You're right. Donnie was the one that was the head coach at Marshall with the triple overtime game. It was the one with Tom Herron was the Marshall coach that faked the heart attack, and another Marshall game, which was another crazy game. And that was the only one I could think of as crazier that was as crazy as this Memphis game, considering you had officiating, which was fascinating. I'll just leave it as that.
Can I just say awful, or
we could go awful? It was pretty bad. I mean, and we'll get into this.
It was equally awful, though. We did talk about that.
Yeah.
I thought it was poorly officiated. I thought some of the block charge calls were poor, but they were poor on both sides. So, I mean, it ended up coming out even. But yeah, some of those calls, you were just like, wow.
Well, the worst one was the goaltend they missed. The Memphis goaltend. Like, that was the most blatant, obvious one, which was just head scratching. Like you said, though, in fairness, it was to both sides. I think both sides were not thrilled with officiating. Penny Hardaway went off on the officiating after the game, which was amusing. But we'll get into this maybe later. I think this is more of an issue in the sport, I think, more than just that isolated game. Because I remember that night, I was also Arkansas, Alabama were playing. They had some interesting officiating in that game. But that game had that happens. And then you have the situation where the scoring was point taken away or not. Now, I'm listening to you and Mark on the broadcast. I have it synced in with the ESPN Plus telecast. And I see, and Mark's like, I mean, people that know Mark, he's as cool as it comes. Like, he's one of the best that I've ever seen at keeping his cool on doing a radio show or on a broadcast, which is not easy, as you know, being on courtside. I mean, you can get really involved. He was about, like, I was worried he was going to go fight somebody. All right, Taylor. And I'm watching the feed, and I see him, like, staring and yelling at somebody, and you're standing up. They show you standing up. I don't know what, just describe that moment. This was in the second overtime, where they looked like for a moment they took a point away, and it was 101, 100. We're trying to figure out what's going on. It was chaotic. They figured it out, got the point back to make it 102, 100. But that was kind of a chaotic moment there.
So odd. I mean, I've never been a part of anything like that. And when it happened, clearly we saw 100 to 102 on the scoreboard as we're looking up. And then the timeout ensues, and then all of a sudden it drops to 101. You see it drop. And I immediately thought that, the PJ Edwards 3 was counted as a 2, and it had been reviewed. And then I quickly looked at Mark, and Mark was saying, no, they already confirmed that was a 3. They're saying we missed a free throw, which we didn't. And he's look, he's such a veteran, like you mentioned. He's so good. He keeps notes over there. He keeps the book. He keeps the runs. I mean, he's got everything. He just doesn't miss. And so he clearly showed the score was 102, right? And so I kind of thought it was maybe an error, and it would be a quick review of like, oh yeah, I accidentally subtracted a point. Not that I actually thought it was 101. And poor guy, obviously at the scores table, maybe an honest error that he corrected, of course. But then it was like both Mark was losing it, man. I actually just kept my headset on, but I probably didn't say anything for 5 minutes. And I just stepped back. You had the coaching staff, you had like this UCF mob and this Memphis, like all coming together. And somehow we were in the middle of it. And Mark was, Mamadou, the coach for UCF's like, telling Mark to go talk to the scoreboard guy, and Mark's like, I don't know, can I do that? And the coaching staff has the iPad showing that, hey, look, we didn't miss the free throw, and they gave the refs the minute mark to show they didn't miss the free throw, which I think ultimately allowed them to review that minute mark and see that it should be 102. So but I was like, what? I mean, that was probably 20 minutes of time and duration of review that really halted the game.
That was a long time.
So yeah, just all the drama, man. And that was just crazy. That was crazy. And there was a lot of reviews down the stretch that, calls were reversed, specifically like a shot clock violation that they called ended up, skimming the rim, and we got the possession back. So a lot of stuff like that made this game very unique.
It's amazing. Yeah. He was like, Mark was flailing his arms.
I was concerned.
Yeah, we're like, and I think some of the fans was encouraging him. They were like, they were getting all fired up on him. I mean,
it was like wild. A mob, man. It was like a mob.
But I mean, what thing is he's tremendous about it. He keeps track of the stats manually.
Yep.
Which we're spoiled because they have the stat monitors. We usually get a stat monitor on the broadcast that takes care of all of that. The stat monitor that night was not working. So I think that didn't help either. I think that did not help in the create.
What's also known about the radio, the stat monitor is not working, right? So you don't have backup of this scoring verification. And also, we didn't get a stat sheet the entire night. We're flying blind, really going off of Mark's data to be able to call some of the trends in the game. We finally got a stat sheet for the post game, but we were just in it. It was unique. It was very unique, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, old school broadcasters always keep track of the score.
Yeah.
Technology sometimes is not your friend on that. But yet, with all of that, UCF found a way to win, Taylor. And that was the thing that just blew me away.
Yeah.
Is they beat up. That's a really good Memphis team. I don't think it's the most talented Memphis team we've ever seen. But I think from at least in the Penny Hardaway era, I think it's actually the most together team they've had, because they've had more talented teams, but they've always had kind of like fragments, like, oh, I don't know, can they chemistry issues, whatever. I thought this Memphis team with Kendrick Davis, who's one of the best point guards in the country, and he kind of did his best Penny Hardaway impersonation performance with the 42 points. That's a really good Memphis team, and UCF found a way to win with depth, which who would have thought that UCF would have more depth than over Memphis. Was a high compliment to these guys.
Totally. And I think that was starting this season for UCF, there's a lot of questions because they have so many new faces, and how are these guys going to gel? But you've seen the depth become a little bit of a factor, because these seasons can be long. You're going to face injuries. People are going to be out, and other people are going to have to step up and find ways to win games. And, specifically in conference season, we always talk about the formula of winning or competing for a conference championship is, you take care of business at home and win on your home court. And then on the road, you at a minimum split, right? So, and they've done that so far in this conference season. And to take care of business and be without some key guys, people would understand, okay, you lose that game because you're now down CJ Walker, you're down Darius Johnson, you're now down Michael Durr, and you'd understand, right, quote unquote, if they lose a game like that. But to defend home court and find a way to win, I just believe that's how teams truly build confidence. You just find ways to win. People start to believe that, hey, as long as we have a chance to win this game at the end, we are going to, and you learn how to close out games. I was really impressed at UCF at the free throw line. I think they ended up making like 33 free throws or something like that. Whatever the stat that they track that's very important to them, they tried to make as many free throws as the other team attempts. And I believe they by a slim margin. They did win that battle, and then they ended up winning. So that confidence, even at the free throw line late in games, is huge, right? And you had a lot of contributors. Ty Freeman's now back in the lineup, and he was called upon, and he had some big plays, and one specifically down the stretch that was huge, and then kind of closes the game with 2 made free throws after he'd struggled a little bit at the free throw line earlier in the game. And so Kendrick Davis was unbelievable. He seemingly was just unguardable one-on-one. And he got the benefit of the whistle too. He's got a lot of that James Harden flop. He feels the contact and he flails. And I thought they gave him, maybe 50% of those calls that shouldn't have been calls. But at the same time, I thought UCF got a lot of those calls too. You think about CJ Kelly coming off the bench. It was banged up with a back tweak, which happens. I've been through that, man. When you tweak your back, everything's painful. You're a little bit slow. And to go into double overtime with a hurt back when you're kind of that's not ideal, man. I can guarantee that he's spent a lot of time this week recovering. So, and then Ethiel Horton, he's become a dude. He's become one of UCF's, if not their go-to guy. I thought even closing out the first overtime, it didn't end up getting to Ethiel Horton's hands to close the game. And certainly, he's just one of those guys that you just want the ball in his hands. As of late, he's trending in the right direction.
Yeah, he was the one that sent it to overtime, hit the 3 to tie it up at 78. And after Kendrick missed the 3 at the buzzer, we went to the first overtime, and it got crazy there. And credit to Coach Dawkins and the staff. They really were big success at the portal. Ethiel Horton coming over from Pitt, CJ Kelly, unheralded, right? I was kind of like, what? A UMass guy? What? Really been tremendous. And then Jalen Young has, to me, been arguably the MVP of the team when you consider Darius Johnson with the multiple injuries he's had this season. And here's Jalen Young, a Baton Rouge Community College transfer kid. Point guard, had to start the year at the point with the injuries with Darius, has to start again. Speak to him. You've played the guard position and what he has done. I think it's been super valuable. I don't even want to think about where this team would be without Jalen Young.
He's been so good. He starts the season, Darius is hurt. He's called upon. He gets some valuable minutes early on to kind of get a feel of what that starter role looks like, right? And he played well enough during that time where he clearly was going to be part of the rotation the rest of the season. And then, of course, Darius, he goes out again, and now he's called upon to go back into that starting role. And there has to be such a level of confidence and comfort from the coaching staff. But what do you not like? Right? Like, he runs the show. He takes care of the basketball most times. He's got the ability to step in and knock in open shots. I think he's really fast with the basketball. We talk about that. There are players that are fast, and there are players that are fast with the basketball. He's both, but he's really fast with the basketball. So he can turn defense into offense quick on missed shots, made shots. He can run it up the court and get you in transition and create for himself and other guys. He finishes well at the basket, given his size, makes free throws, right? So, like, all of those things. And then, for him to foul out, that was a huge deal. And CJ Kelly and Horton are trying to kind of make it work. And they did. They did enough to face that Memphis pressure. A lot of people don't understand, too, is like that Memphis brand, they pressure you all game. So as a guard, and I've been in those games specifically against Memphis, it's not just like, oh, they're pressing now at the end of the game. No, they've been picking up full court all game, and you have to break it, and you have to get an offense. So there's a certain level of just, taking care of business, taking care of the ball, and kind of doing that for as many minutes as they did down their starting point guard, which was super impressive.
How does a player like PJ Edwards, who's coming into the game, played only 37 minutes the whole season, I think he scored 4 points coming in, his number is called, and he responds. Hit 8. He was a big factor in the win. 8 points, double overtime. I think it could be his coming out party. Who knows? You've been in that position where your number gets called at you may not have played most of the game, and all of a sudden your number's called. How do you stay ready as a player mindset and just describe how difficult it is what PJ Edwards was able to accomplish? Because a lot of players in that moment maybe, oh, this is too big. I'm not, I don't feel comfortable. I don't have a rhythm. He was shooting the ball right back and hit played well.
I have been there, and I am so impressed, and he can't get enough credit for his performance because we'll talk to the mindset in a little bit, what it takes to stay ready and how that all works. But when you recall, he comes into the game and you're thinking, okay, we're already down so many guys. Now, all of a sudden like, how are we going to get points? And PJ comes in the game. I believe his first possession was a turnover, to start the overtime. And then, he had another couple shaky possessions. That whole debacle between, we had a timeout, we used it, and then we didn't have a timeout, and it was almost, the turnover situation. So it was shaky, right? So you had every reason to kind of go, oh my gosh, I don't belong in this game. You can feel your nerves, right? And and then boom, he hits that three from the right corner, and the place goes nuts, and he just settled in. And he decided from there, okay, no, I've played basketball long enough. I belong here and I can contribute. And then the rest of the game, he was tremendous. I mean, the corner three, he had really a shot that was a pretty good look to end it, I believe, after the first overtime, and just barely missed it. And then, his drive over Kendrick Davis to get a big 2-pointer to go. I think it's one of the hardest things to do in sport, what he did. I always thought that the guys that had it really easy, and I've been on both sides of this, are the guys that know no matter what, that they're playing, 30 to 35 minutes, 40 minutes a game. They know that they're in the rotation, and it's very little based upon their performance possession by possession. They're just one of the guys. They're one of the best players, and you just know that, their minutes aren't going to be judged on their performance from a possession to possession standpoint. They're going to be judged at, okay, if they go through a big slump, maybe they're pulled out of the starting lineup, but they're going to be given much more of a leash than, say a guy that's fighting for a 9th, 10th spot, and you're just trying to find your way in a rotation. And he was really out of the rotation. So, in that big of a moment, I'm impressed by it, because I think to keep yourself mentally ready when because you don't want to get let down. You get yourself prepped for the game. We're all humans. Okay, I'm going to play. I want to stay sharp, but then game by game, you're not getting the minutes, right? So then you slowly human nature creeps in. And you go, okay, well, yeah, I guess maybe I'm out of this rotation. I'll go hard in practice. I'll get better, but this year's not my year. There's a tendency to fall into that trap. So it's very hard to stay ready. And then when your number's called, that you don't have a long leash. That, like, you go in there and turn the basketball over, it's not good. You go in there and miss a couple shots, you might not get a couple more shots. So the fact that he was able to do what he did, I just have massive amount of respect for what he did.
What surprised you about this team? Now we've seen them 17 games in, that maybe you didn't know or didn't expect going into the season. Obviously, there's certain things you're looking for and you're questioning, but what's one thing that's kind of wow? This really surprises me about this group.
How unselfish they are. Yeah, how unselfish they are. They, they're going to be good defensively, because Coach Dawkins, that's part of his brand. And we're pretty deep as far as the front line to start the season. And I think still are to a certain extent. We have enough of guys. Taylor Hendricks has been an unbelievable defender, So some of the guys that can guard multiple positions, protect the rim, rebound it on misses, they've become an elite defensive team in the country. And that's kind of we've seen some teams in the past that have been very good defensively, and most of Coach Dawkins' teams are all good defensively, and they're all willing defenders, because he just demands that as the standard, which I love. But I think I've grown to see this team become unselfish, and you see it in moments, as a player or as a former player, where, okay, that's a good shot, but it's not the best shot, and then you see the guy make the extra pass. Some guy beats his guy off the dribble. You could totally understand if he took it all the way to the rack. It's a fine shot. You're not going to get pulled out for it. No one's going to judge you. But boom, you kick it out because there's a better shot available. And I think I've seen so many guys in the lineup do that. And I don't think there's one guy on that team that's selfish. I mean, I truly don't. Sometimes I wish Taylor Hendricks would be more selfish, because he's so talented, and he shares so much and defers so much. And I really, really enjoy that about this team. And I also think it's one of the reasons they can be so dangerous, because it's hard to prepare for a team that, 4 or 5 guys can really hurt you. You got CJ Kelly a couple games again, goes for 30. Boom. A couple of days later, he doesn't have many points. Ethiel Horton goes off. Next game, Ethiel Horton goes off. We've seen Darius Johnson go off. We've seen Taylor Hendricks go off. So you have these guys of, it's hard to prepare. 4 guys, I believe, averaging in double figures. When you're reading the scouting report, you gotta pay attention to everyone.
And that was the thing I like about this team, is the variety of ways. They don't, have a guy or two that like, man, this guy has to score or they're just going to struggle all night. It can come from anywhere. And I think that even applies to the 3-point shooting. They hit 16 threes in that Memphis game, tied the school record back from since 2004, but it can come from different guys. Kelly's a great 3-point shooter. Horton, Young,
Yep.
among others. Taylor can shoot the three. Hendricks can shoot the three. You know, we've had good 3-point shooting teams in the past, but it's usually whether it be a Matt Williams, being the
Yes.
focal point, or a Darren Green, even this recently. There's one maybe guy that you're like, all right, this is our best 3-point shooter. Everybody else is kind of like, this
Yep.
team has multiple guys, maybe the deepest shooters depth wise that they've had from that standpoint.
Well, and I think they're versatile too. The guards, I mean, they're most some of the off guards too. They're bigger guys, so they can finish at the rim. They can post up. I mean, Horton is a problem in like when he gets in there, man. He causes a lot of problems, and same with CJ Kelly. Like, those guys 6'4", strong guys, veteran guys, tough. Darius Johnson's the same way, man. He's got a strength about him. So when he gets around the rim, I mean, he can finish over the bigs. So, and even Jalen Young, I mean, for his stature, he finishes incredibly well around the rim. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's one thing to have a sharpshooter that everyone has to pay attention to, that you're not helping off of, and everyone looks at the scouting report and goes, okay, yeah, like a Matt Williams. Hey, you just don't leave, you don't help. You fake and drop off Matt Williams. You don't help, right? And but it's another thing when you go, hey, we got four guys that are pretty good 3-point shooters that can fill it up, and also those four guys can also take it to the rim, and they can also spread you out. They can put it on the floor, including Taylor Hendricks, right? And so it's cool, fun to watch those lineups, but very, very tough to defend. And I think their last two games specifically, and I'm not speaking exclusively on the entire year, but their last two games specifically, you've seen what happens when they combine their elite defensive standard and make shots and offensively find a rhythm. It's very scary. They can score a lot of points too. This is not just a team that can win in the 50s and the 60s. This is a team that can win in the hundreds, in the 90s, and the 80s.
So now you win a multiple overtime game. You've been on this shoes where you've played in these lengthy games. How do you recover from a game like that? It helps that you won, obviously, right? Like you've been at both ends. Easier to get over it, recover from a win than a loss, obviously. But
Yeah.
now, you got a couple days, then you got to get on a plane, go on the road, face a good, Tulane team that's playing their best basketball. How do you recover as a player after a game like that?
Well, I think there's twofold, right? There's a recovery physically, and then there's a recovery mentally and emotionally. I think physically, right? It depends probably how old you are. There's some old guys on the team, right? Some veterans. You got to get in the cold tub. You gotta get treatment. You gotta prepare like you're a pro, and make sure you're getting the proper rest and all that stuff, right? So that goes without saying. And those guys are used to that. CJ Kelly, your back, it's probably going to take, when you tweak your back like that, it's not something that just goes away. Typically it lingers a while, and you have to manage that pain and manage the treatment. And that's stuff that I'm sure all those guys are doing. But then there's another side of the recovery that I look at. Do you know how much fun those guys had winning that game, right? I mean, there's a high there that is hard to understand unless you've been in that situation. Even as a broadcaster now, I went home, I couldn't sleep that night. I had a high and a glow about me the next 24 hours. So as a player, you have to find a way to, have that high, but then find a way to come back to neutral and prepare for the next game. And I think that's likely what, Coach Dawkins and that staff are talking about. Hey, we'll celebrate tonight, get your rest, and then you come prepared tomorrow to start preparing for Tulane. So I think both are equally important. It's a long conference season, and I've experienced as a player. Look, every game matters. You can get off to a hot start, and you can lose that momentum just as quick as you built it. So every possession, every game matters in conference, and that would be the mission that these guys, I think it would be effective to kind of take that advice.
Obviously, not all the news positive from the Memphis game. We find out Michael Durr didn't play. We find out after fractured his left hand. He had surgery. He's gonna be out a while, as Coach Dawkins said in the post game. They hope to get him back before the end of the season. But that's a big blow there, Taylor, because I mean we've lost C.J. Walker for the season. Only played 4 games. That front court now is becoming a little thin there. Obviously, Lahat got to start on Wednesday. I'm going to be kind of curious how Coach Dawkins and the staff kind of handles the front court we saw them start big, but they went small at the end of that
Yeah.
Memphis game, which really fair. And I thought Ty Freeman flourished in that. But your thoughts on the loss of Michael Durr here and moving forward, how UCF can sort of, figure out this situation on the front court?
It's too bad because Michael Durr has been a great contributor, especially lately. I mean, and some of these games it's about matchups too, and some of these games are, these teams are bigger and there's more of a need for kind of that big 7-footer that can mix it up. And then some of these, games you go smaller. So I think Coach Dawkins will look at the matchups each game on whether he goes big or small and make those decisions. But Lahat Chun's got to step up. Tierno Sila, we saw him, come in and play minutes at the 5 as well. He's a guy that is likely going to be asked to contribute more than maybe they thought he would, given the injuries. And I think he's capable. I think they're valuable minutes in conference that he's gotten so far. We've seen him make threes. We've seen the upside from him. We've seen the good attitude and him playing hard. And hopefully he continues to be a guy that Coach Dawkins can trust defensively and in those key moments, and physically to go get up some of those tough boards when his number's called on. So I think you kind of do it collectively. And I think, you're going to have to mix and match matchups just based upon the opponent.
Yeah, and I'm really. How important is that to have that person next to Taylor, who maybe they play him too. I mean, he's a great rim protector. We've seen him with some of the great blocks he's had this year. I'll never forget that Wichita block he had
Yeah.
that helped late in that game. But the one thing is this roster has some versatility. He could play Hendricks inside and playing in Tyus Freeman, who seems to me, Taylor, the last couple games has flourished in an open court type of game like UCF had against SMU, where they opened it up, and then the Memphis game, which was up and down. That seemed to fit Freeman's style.
Yeah, no doubt. Right. And I think you'll see that lineup for sure. I think Taylor Hendricks at the 5 is you'll see that. And I think you'll actually see it a decent amount. And then it's just going to be, who are the other players that kind of fill that gap that we just referenced. So, but I mean, that 5 with Taylor at the, at the 5 position, that causes problems to defend, like we just mentioned. So you go back to say, okay, well, defensively and on the boards, we got to figure out a way to just, still be able to rebound the basketball collectively as a unit. But man, that's tough to guard too, because all of a sudden you go 5 out that can hurt you in any what way. And you're spreading the court about as well as you can.
We've gone this long. We haven't talked in depth about Taylor Hendricks. It's not because he hasn't played well, but if we forget, he's a freshman.
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting to almost take, he could do this, he could do that, he could play the 5. He's just a freshman, but what's been your thoughts on him? There was so much hoopla coming in about him. And you're always kind of like, all right, everybody's got hoopla. This is college basketball, Division I. I mean,
Yep.
he's on pace to be the freshman of the year in the American. He's setting records there. I mean, what's been your thoughts seeing him up close?
I think he's exceeded anybody's expectations. I think I'm blown away by just his seemingly attitude and then his combination of his talent and then how quickly he's adapted to the college game. And I'll get into that. But, I kind of hate the whole 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, 5-star. So I'm a bit cynical. Anytime you get a 5-star player, you get a 4-star player. I'm like you just referenced, I'm like, we'll see, right? Because you've seen that before, right? They're highly rated, but they can't put it together, or there's something there that just they're not able to really live up to that star next to their name that some rival scout put out there because they saw them, in a couple games in Las Vegas and at Disney World, right? So I'm just I don't love the stars and the rivals thing, but man, you get a guy like Taylor come in and live up and exceed the hype. Man, I just think he's special in a couple ways. I mean, the talent's clear. He's a better shooter than I thought he was. Not seeing him in high school or really seeing him much, but just for his size, his skill level is there, right? He can handle, he can shoot it, he can take you to the basket. He's got great footwork. I mean, he's got an incredible skill set. Number one. So the upside's so clear, right? Physically, you can see, he's a lean guy, but he's got a body that you can tell, he'll be able to put on some muscle and some weight, when he wants and how he wants. So there's really nothing physical that I look at and just say I'm not amazed by and excited by, but more so, just watching how he's adapted to the game, like defensively, for example. My experience coming into college basketball and the guys that I came with, I think it was 3 or 4 of our freshman class, some of the guys just couldn't get the defensive concepts, just even as simple as like help side, jump into the ball, early help, just like these basic things that aren't so basic when you're making that jump. And he is just a really quality team defender. And he gets those concepts and he executes those concepts, but he's also a really good on the ball defender. And he's also a really good rim protector, right? And then, oh, by the way, he's a really good rebounder. So there's really no weakness in his game. And, sometimes that's what you mentioned. Sometimes you just want him to be more aggressive, although he's so unselfish too. So, yeah, I think I don't have a bad word to say. His body language is really good too. I mean, like his attitude towards his teammates seems good. Like you just never see him pout. You never see, the melodrama that typically like a young player goes through when they make a mistake. He's competitive. I mean, I kind of feel like all the buzzwords that you use to describe a great player, I just used, but I just truly mean all of them from my experience so far watching him. It's been a total pleasure.
Yeah, he's been a pleasure to watch, and fans have really enjoyed it. Taylor Young joining us here on the Black and Gold Banneret. Now, as we talk on this Friday, as we record this Friday, Joe Lunardi, the ESPN brand, has updated his field. Granted, now again, this is January, but hey, as college basketball people, why not? You got content. He has put UCF in as one of the last 4 teams in, as well as Memphis. So a 3-bid league right now for the American, which I thought actually UCF beating Memphis was good for the American because I think it helps their chances of getting 3 bids in versus 2. UCF would be in a playing game versus Pittsburgh, which would bring back memories to the NCAA tournament match against Pitt from many years ago. Plus, obviously, it would be an interesting storyline with Ethiel Horton against his former team there, and they played today morning. Obviously, it's early. It's all early.
Yep.
What I'm curious, Taylor, as a player, do you all pay attention to any of that stuff?
Yeah, I think you do. I mean, I think nowadays too. I mean, I'm an old guy, so obviously with social media and all that stuff too, and message boards. I mean, I think some people pay attention more than others. I was probably in the middle, but I think the information's everywhere. It's out there. You're probably going to see it. So, I don't think I think people know it. But then you try to lock in, right? There's a big one, right? You look at the standings in the American. You got Houston, UCF, Tulane, Temple, all kind of huddled up around 4-1 in the conference. And so, games like that are huge. It's still early on in the conference season. But I do think, I mean, look, regardless of the result, I think this team is a tournament team. I mean, I think they have all the pieces. I hope they can stay healthy enough to get some guys back and be a little bit full strength. Of course, they're going to have to win some tough games and execute. But man, I just think this team has what it takes for all the things we've mentioned so far in this podcast. So I think you can kind of, you get through the pre-conference season. This has been at least my opinion. And you have so many new faces. You have so many challenges. UCF's lost so many close games. I mean, when you look at their losses and you look at what Missouri's doing now, I mean, playing so well. And, so they don't really have like a true bad loss. All their losses are very close games, so they've put together a good enough resume at this point that a good enough conference season and some key victories, I think, are and making sure that they, in the conference tournament, that they show up and maybe steal a couple, get a couple wins, and maybe compete for a championship. I think they really put themselves in a good position to get a bid. And that's not an added pressure. I think that the guys are playing for that. You're playing to win a conference championship. You're playing to go to the NCAA tournament. So I think, that's an exciting thing where they are and where they sit, and how this conference lines up too. I think this conference is still really quality. Houston's obviously been the class the last few years, but they're going to be able to get another shot at Houston, right? You win that game immediately, boom, that's your staple win. And of course that Memphis win being a staple win as well. So you just have some opportunities there.
Yeah, Houston ranked number 1 in the country. If Houston were to win out between now and January 25th, when Houston comes here, you realize, Taylor, it would be the first time UCF would host the number 1 ranked team in the country at home.
Yeah, and don't you feel like I don't know if you watched that Houston game on the road, but I feel like we're good enough to beat them. I mean, look, you had to play well, and Houston's a great team, but man, I mean, I still don't think from a talent standpoint, I think we're right there. I'll put it that way. Like, some of those Memphis teams back in the day, prior to me and when I played, it just felt like they were just so over and above talent wise, right? The Joey Dorseys, the guys that had 3, 4 first round picks, and you just kind of felt like they'd beat you by 20, 30 points and just would overwhelm you as far as the talent level. I think Houston is extremely talented. They're a very good basketball team, but I think they're beatable because I think UCF's a very good basketball team and very talented.
Well, it speaks to the depth. I mean, I talked to Coach Dawkins early in the year, and he acknowledged this is probably the deepest roster he's had, and I think that's been proven with the injuries they've had. I mean, I think past UCF teams, you lose a CJ Walker type, your season's done. But they've kind of been able to survive that. Now they lose Michael Durr, but they have guys that could step in there, and that's kind of a credit to the roster building from Coach Dawkins there in that culture. So you're right.
Yeah.
That Houston game, they were down double digits early in that first half, and you're thinking, all right, this is going to get away from you. But they fought back, took the lead. That was a great performance. You mentioned the Missouri game. Man, that's still painful, man. That's
Yeah,
fluky.
that is
Oh,
brutally painful, man.
oh,
You mentioned Coach Dawkins, man. I think he likes this team.
yes.
I think he really likes his team, and I'm sure as a coach, you say you like every team the same, kind of like kids, But I don't know. I think he's got a real liking for how coachable and unselfish this team is, and then how hard they play. That SMU game was a reminder to me. I thought SMU played hard in the first half, but then you just saw UCF. They just have a toughness and a will about them that they're just going to compete for 40 minutes, and I think he loves that about this team. And I saw Coach Dawkins get about as fired up as I've seen him at that Memphis game. I mean, he's fist pumping, he's looking at the crowd, he's hyping him up. So, I mean, I think he's had a really great year as a coach, and that staff deserves a lot of credit, not only for the guys that they've brought in, but how they've kind of associated and brought those guys together and worked through some of this early adversity as some of these injuries.
What's the biggest key or question you have now for down the stretch here for the second half of the year for this team?
When do we get Darius Johnson back? No, yeah, I think if they get a little bit healthy, man, it's just offensively, defensively they're going to be there. Just offensively, can they continue to get better and put it together, which they have in the last 2 games, and just get more continuity in the half court. I also think too, this is a team that when they can get out in transition and they can get to the free throw line, they're so much better. Mark and I talked about that on the broadcast. Is that you don't always have to play against half court defense, right? You can look to get easy buckets throughout the game. And you do that by, getting to the foul line, attacking the paint, really seeking out, that contact and making the referee blow a whistle and being aggressive. Right. And then also getting out and running, getting in transition and playing fast when it's called upon. But in the half court, can they execute, make the plays down the stretch, into the possession by possession game, which a lot of times in conference you end up in, specifically late. There's not a question mark for me. They've shown they can do it. It's just how good do they get as an offensive unit once these guys start to gel? Do you start to see Horton go off, but CJ Kelly also go off, right? Do you start to see these guys not only where you have one guy that has a really good game, but all of a sudden you got multiple guys that are just hurting you, which they've had throughout this year. And I think it's been some of their bigger wins. So offensively, man, if they keep getting better, they're going to be very, very scary, and no one's going to want that
And you're right.
matchup.
And you're right. Getting Darius back healthy for the duration would be huge. Hopefully, get him back sooner. There sooner than later on that situation. Let me ask you nationally. I know you watch a lot of college hoops. What stood out? What has stood out to you this year in the national landscape from college basketball that you've watched?
Man, it's been there. Well, I wouldn't say parody. I think that's been going on. I mean, my family's all from Lexington, Kentucky, right? So
Oh, oh,
I grew up a big UK fan, and then now John Calipari's there, and we played against Calipari. So it's fine. I don't root for or against anybody in college basketball outside of UCF. But I get a lot of looped in with the cousins texting about UK, and they've been having some real struggles, and so I think a lot of these traditional blue blood programs, some of them are struggling. And so you're kind of seeing some opportunity, like Alabama. I've seen them a couple times to where I don't know. Is that becoming a basketball school? Right?
high
Is that
notes, yeah.
way too soon, way too hot of a take? But some of these schools that kind of been on the cusp are really putting. Auburn's now been consistently good, so it's been fun to kind of see some new faces and some new teams. Houston's another one. They've been really good, but now they're like one of the teams, right? One of the programs. So I think that shuffle, and then also you miss it. You mentioned the officiating. I think it's been a little bit different. I don't know if I could have played in this era. It's a little bit more ticky tack on the when you're guarding the ball, and they're trying to promote a little bit more scoring in the last couple years, and players impeding progress and so on and so forth. So, and I also say in that officiating, the review thing is still, I'm still getting used to that, man. It's still amazing to me that you can review calls like that so often throughout the game and at the end of the game and at the end of half. So, but yeah, in full transparency, I watch a decent amount of college basketball, but I don't watch a ton. I got 2 young kids, and I'm paying attention to UCF when they're playing, and I'm getting out there for home games. So I catch the
You're
highlights
not
more
Michael
often.
Donald that's just like, watching day and night and just tweeting about it, and flying all over it when he's not doing games. Have you,
No, no, no. I'm in a relationship, and I can text him and ask him questions, but no, he's way more of a hoops junkie than I probably am at this phase, but I still enjoy it very much.
He's doing very well. He just did the SMU game on ESPNU. He's got some games coming up on the ESPN family networks. He's doing games on CBS Sports Network, and then BJ Taylor just did a CBS Sports Network game on Wednesday night up in Birmingham. We got all y'all, man. We got we're broadcaster you analyst you here at UCF. Here.
Yeah. Man, that's great. It's so fun to see those guys have success, man. I love it. I actually watched Mike on TV, and I've watched him throughout his career as he's gotten games and I've been able to, or whatever it is. And I texted him the other day and I said, "Man, you've gotten really good, and I really enjoyed your broadcast." He's made it a point to get better every single year. He works hard at it to get, better games and more games. And to me, he's having what I'd call a breakout year, where he's gotten a lot of really good games, got some ESPN. He deserves it. No one deserves it more. And then BJ Taylor's, man, he's a guy that's going to do incredibly well in that space too. He's just got a natural personality for it. And I love to see him win too. And it's great.
No, it's tremendous. Well, think about the officiating. Where do you think that's changed? Because I agree. I feel like one of the problems is you mentioned the replays and the officiating, the ticky tackles. It takes away the flow of the game, and I feel like that's been Jay Billis has talked about that. That's an
Yeah.
issue in the sport. And look, in defense of the officials, I think some of the coaches have blame for this because they're constant. As you know, this courtside, there's coaches that are chirping at the refs for a call every second, every second. So I think that's
Yeah.
part of the issue. But where do you think this changed? Do you think I just wish we could get back to a game where it's flow? I mean, there's too much. You even alluded to it on the broadcast in the Memphis game on all these block charges calls. It's just it's constant. I think there's more calls block charges on a college basketball game than there is on a week's worth of games in the NBA.
I think there are more charges called that I've seen in college basketball this year. Like you go through a game. I remember you playing, and maybe you have a couple charges throughout a game, right? Somebody steps in, they take one in the chest, you go nuts. It's great. But sometimes you'll have like 10 charges. Like and yeah. So I don't know that. I don't know why that is. And the reviews. I think if you're going to review something, you hope that they review it quick, you're decisive, and then you move on. You're right, because it does interrupt the game flow. That Memphis game took forever. I mean, there was so much stoppage, so much review, and I'm sure the guys appreciated because they needed all the rest they could possibly get. So I'm sure that helped down the stretch. But I always thought like a couple years back where college basketball tried to eliminate a lot of the physicality that existed to increase scoring, and allow freedom of movement and players, so it could increase scoring, which would increase the enjoyable and increase viewership. Which makes sense. I guess I'm a little bit old school. I kind of like when somebody's running for an offensive rebound and you used to be able to just stick them in the chest and and go box out and get a rebound. But again, that's probably why I wasn't athletic enough to probably play in this era and not get away with a little bit of the physicality that was required to guard some of these bigger athletic guards.
No, you're right. It's different now, and I just wish they would let the players play a little bit. Guys like Taylor Hendricks, I fouled out on a ticky tack call. Really, couple
Garbage. Yeah.
yeah.
There was one call at the end of the game. Gosh, it was one on Kendrick Davis, but it did not affect the play. It shouldn't have been called. I think it might have been Jalen Young's 5th foul. Regardless, I remember it vividly, and I was like, that is not a call you make, period. If you want to make one where he's operating within the space, I mean, it was just a little bit of a touch, but it didn't even affect the ball handler, and it was way away from the basket. It was just like, as a referee and judgment call, it just didn't make sense. But whatever, we'll complain about the refs forever, and that's just part of the game. So what I did talk about in the broadcast is at some point you do have to adapt to the way that they're officiating. So if they're calling it tight and I'm a guard and I'm an offensive player, I'm selling it too. I'm getting any sort of contact. I'm selling it. I'm going at the basket, because I know that if they're going to be calling it light, I'm going to be in command as the offensive player and go seek out the paint. So you have to adapt as a player, and it's never perfect, for sure. Bad calls, good calls on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, Kendrick Davis did a great job of knowing that, adapting, knowing that, hey, I'm going to force some bumps, get to the foul line a lot. I thought that you're right. You have to adjust, but like you said, we could spend hours on the officiating. That's a whole other story.
They're all terrible. No, I'm kidding. No,
There
there
you go.
plenty of good referees. They do an incredible job. It's a tough job to have, but no, they certainly get the brunt of the fans' anger.
That's right. Sometimes, us media people give them a hard time a little bit. Got to keep them in line. But hey, listen, Taylor, this has been awesome. You've done a great job this year, as I mentioned, and throughout your career broadcasting. And I know it's been fun listening to you and get to work with you. It was good to talk to you about this, because I thought of you during the Memphis game, because you could relate to it. And plus, I really did enjoy you and Mark on that radio. I mean, I always enjoy it. But that's a broadcast you two probably will never forget anytime soon. Your next game is what? Houston? Is that the next? Or are you going to Tampa?
It's probably going to be Houston, but I'll probably make that call as it gets closer. And I also close with this, Eric. You've done a great job hosting. I appreciate the conversation today. Those games against Memphis, so on throughout my career, you were in those games, but it just didn't seem like you could win enough of them.
Yeah.
You'd play a school close and go in overtime, but you lost at the end, and you just felt like you were pushing and pushing to get to that level. And over time, UCF started to win those games. And I think when I reflect on the Memphis game that they just won at home, I think we've now, Coach Dawkins should get a ton of credit. We've now become a team that expects to win those games. And, no longer are we, scrambling and pushing to beat the Memphises of the world and beat the Houstons of the world. No, we expect to compete and have a chance to win at the end. And I just, that's a mentality thing. That's a culture thing. That's a standard thing. And that means a bright future for this program.
You're going to miss the Memphis game. I know we're excited going Big 12, the incredible league, and all that down the road, but the Memphis game, I can sense in your voice, you will miss the Memphis game. I mean, even with despite going to Memphis and those struggles there, but there was something special, right? When you're playing that jersey, you will miss that. There's going to be a part of us that will miss that game.
Yeah, that was the mountaintop, right? When we first come into Conference USA and then eventually the American, that was always the class of the conference for really a decade. So I think that's one we'll miss. But I think that mentality that we talked about, we're gonna have to take into the Big 12. And as you see some of these names that you haven't seen, you talk about Kansas and some of the programs, right? You just it will be the same way, and we have to hopefully lean into that and say, hey, we're going after them, and we expect to win and compete with those programs. That'll be fun. That'll be a fun transition.
It'll be a fun transition. I think we'll have many nights like we did Wednesday night. We're like in the Big 12 like that, and that was a special one. And you were a good part of it with you and Mark Daniels on the radio call. We look forward to hearing you on the air next time there, Taylor, on 96.9 The Game, and then streamed there as well. Thank you for taking the time. I know he's busy. We're going to try to get you on a little more frequently. Michael Donald gets all the airtime with Mark on this show. I figure you get some airtime too, man. Come on.
I got no problem playing second fiddle, man. I'll be second fiddle anytime.
Thanks, Taylor, for doing this. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, buddy. Take care.